Does it matter who the Speaker of the House is? Are Paul Ehrlich's past mistakes excused by his credentials? Can you have morals even if you don't believe in God? We'll talk about all of this and more on today's episode of Good Take, Bad Take. Hey friends, welcome to this episode of the Good Take, Bad Take podcast. This is the show where we scrounge through the internet, find a bunch of different takes on all different sides. We highlight the good ones, support what they're doing. We also highlight the bad ones and kind of pick apart what they're doing wrong. We try to have a lot of fun along the way and provide good arguments for everything. My name's Britt. I'm here with my co-host Donnie. And before we get started, please make sure to like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. It helps us out a lot and we love to hear from you. And without further ado, let's get into these first takes. So the first one, frequent featured guest, whether he knows it or not, of the show, Joe Walsh. So he's quote retweeting someone who replied to him, and the quote retweet reads, "I'm curious who your top choices would be for House Speaker, given your knowledge of the personalities in politics." And Joe Walsh replies, "If still in Congress, I'd vote for whoever the majority of the party voted for because who the speaker is never mattered to me. I always cared more about opening up the amendment process, returning to regular order, and enacting conservative policy. I'd want this crap show over ASAP." Okay. What do you think, Donnie? Good take, bad take?
It's tough because I think it's really split. First of all, technically speaking, just so that we've got the actuallys out of the way. Actually, the Speaker of the House does not have to be an elected representative. It can be any individual. Really, the legislative body, the House, determines what its duties are. The House the Speaker of the House does not have a ton outlined in the Constitution. So there's actually a lot less, importance to this role than I feel like everyone's thinking, because ideally, even if you're sort of in a blue-pilled, we can make the system work thought process, the Speaker of the House in its current power structure in the current years has had way too much power. So with all of that context, with Joe Walsh saying, "I don't care who it is," I'm like, okay, well, that's kind of based in the sense that I don't love all this self-aggrandizing of how important this role is and how it needs to be the perfect leader. So I'm like, okay, I'm a little bit with you there. I care more about opening up the amendment process, which if he's right about that, I actually agree, because I think that's one of the big problems is that the Speaker of the House was not letting normal people bring amendments to bills and normal representatives do that. So the opening process, good. Returning to regular order, I'm a little iffy on that. We don't like that. And enacting conservative policy, again, not so sure on that, because generally speaking, conservative policy just becomes liberal policy 2 days later. When you put a policy and a law in place, generally speaking, it's not legalizing freedom. So unless you're talking about repealing laws or explicitly passing laws that strip government of power, I'm a little wary maybe of what your conservative policy is. I'd want this crap show over ASAP. So it's kind of good, but when you think about it from the lens of who the speaker is, and then also I'd vote for whoever the majority of the party voted for, I think overall it's a bad take. So he's got he's like saying the wrong thing for the right reasons, I think, allegedly the right reasons. So, I just vote whoever the party votes for. Well, that's terrible, no matter what. Like, just voting for whoever the party votes for, that means you're probably not going to get any of the good things that you want there. And that's the entire point, is ever since Paul Ryan, really, even as much as John Boehner kind of started closing these doors, but even John Boehner, who was not friendly to conservative or liberty-oriented people, even he was more open than Paul Ryan, ironically enough, who a lot of conservatives really liked at one point in time. You and me, unfortunately, included back in the day. And so, not caring who the speaker is because you want to do these things, even if you're talking about it from a strategic standpoint, like he seems to be saying, like, I'd want this crap show over with. I want this out. I just vote with whoever the majority's voting for because strategically we would get our guy in and then I could do these great things. It's not a strategic move, because voting for whoever the party wants is not guaranteed to get you someone who's going to allow you to open the amendment process, enact conservative policy. And in fact, all of the reasons he lists there, the 20 or so holdouts could be arguing right now exactly for the exact same things. The whole reason they're not voting for whoever the party is voting for is because they want someone who's going to enact conservative policy, open the amendment process, return to regular order, whatever it is.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think this is maybe on the better side of a lot of the takes that are like, um, we just need to get the speaker elected because we need to return to the business
Yeah.
of,
Yeah.
managing the country. It's like, man, we could do without you managing the country. We'd all be better off. So it's better. It's on the better side of those type of takes. I think it's maybe the best representation, maybe of those takes. But to me, it's still a bad one because it's like, no one really wanted your help, with these things. I mean, people might think they want these folks' help, but it's like, man, all
Right.
these guys, they enact policy that helps them. That at the end of the day, that's how it all works. None of the good stuff that he's mentioning is actually going to get done, except for maybe the quote unquote conservative policy that really is just, aggressing against the American people in all sorts of different ways. So, yeah, to me, it's like I wish Joe Walsh had said, I don't care who the speaker is, and I hope that they don't elect any speaker and that Congress stays in a state of not doing anything for a long period of time. That would have been a good take. But the reason he wants the speaker in there, the reason he would vote for the majority is because he wants to get back to the business of managing the country. It's like, man, I don't need you to manage me. Like I would rather, of all the people in the world that I would choose, it would not be some person on the other side, 4,000 miles away from me that has never met me, does not share any of my values, and lives a lifestyle completely contrary to the way that I live. And I think there are a lot of Americans. I mean, not even Americans like me. There are Americans that are totally different than me that also share that same thing, because it turns out, when you're in a country this large, everyone is different. So, this is lock and step with like if you believe in the entire system of how things are, but given how unhappy everyone is and how miserable everyone is in terms of the economic conditions and the way things play out, I don't think people actually like the way the system is at all, right? They just don't understand that like we could just do away with this, right? You don't need these people far away to manage you. Maybe you can make an argument for people closer, but I don't need some Speaker of the House, to control everything. And it's really funny to me too, like how like the titles and the veneration, that people put on these different things, like, oh, they're third in line for the presidency, as if that's like almost ever mattered, in the
Right.
past 250 years of us being a country. So
Well, and if we get to that point, like, shoot, I'm happy, removing that as well, like removing
yeah,
that from mattering too. Let's make it so that that's not a big deal either. Let's do both. That's fine with me.
yeah,
Um, yeah, the other thing too is like this is such a non-answer even for someone asking the question, because to me, like I don't. It's like I don't care about this in the way that a lot of people do. But if I was asked who would I vote for in this position, knowing what I know and knowing that different people have different principles and different people would fulfill this very real position differently means that I should probably have an opinion on this kind of thing. Especially if you're going to tout yourself as someone like he is, who's a former congressman and he speaks on politics and stuff. So just saying, I wouldn't care and I would say, no, I just want to get back to business. It's like, fine. But someone's also asking, like, unless you're going to say something substantive, which to me is like, we need to, we should. No one is a substantive answer in the sense that you're specifically saying my goal here is to obstruct this body from doing its nasty business. Therefore, no one is my answer. That's a great answer. Saying I don't care who, I just want to do these things. Well, sure, but the person's asking you who would best be the person who to achieve that, right? That's kind of the question this person's asking, not
yeah,
like, who's your best friend in Congress? No, the whole point there is that person's trying to ask you at least to weigh in on this. So, if I have to answer, I would say no one. But if I have to pick a person, I'm Justin Amash. He's made his pitch for it. I think he'd make a great Speaker of the House because he's very liberty oriented. He's blue pilled, which I'm not, but like he's the best blue pilled person there is. So
yeah,
Justin Amash it is. So it's like I think no one's a good answer. I also think that if you're not going to have an answer that actually gives some level of substance, like this is this non-answer, which is just I just believe in these values. It's kind of like asking someone how would you enact a tax cut? And you're like, I don't care how I do it. I just think that people should earn their taxes or keep their taxes the way that they should. And it's like, okay, that's fine. But if you're running for office or if you're going to try to pitch yourself as someone who's knowledgeable on policy details, you need to maybe put forward a specific response.
yep.
I don't know. This seems a little bit more like posturing to me.
It's a classic in his case. So
That is true. That is true.
All right, moving on to our next one. Well, we've got a headline and a byline of an article. And the headline reads, The Last of Us showrunner says death in the game means less because it's just, quote, watching pixels die, unquote. The Last of Us screenwriter Craig Mazin compares death in the game to that in the upcoming show. The Last of Us, I think, comes out in 2 days. I might be wrong.
Yeah, something like that. It's pretty close.
Yeah. And then here's the quote from the article. Quote, when you're playing a section, you're killing people. And when you die, you get sent back to the checkpoint. All those people are back, moving around in the same way, said Mazin in an interview with The New Yorker. Watching people die, I think, ought to be much different than watching pixels die. I was thinking about this one on the drive home, and I don't actually know what to think of it yet. So I'm really curious to hear your perspective. And
yeah. So this one, it's interesting because the main contention being made that, you know, it should be more tragic, or it should move you more to see a real person die. I agree with that contention. Yes, I actually do think that that's true. However, I think this is a bad take because of the way that it's phrased and the lack of context and the out of touch nature this way this person pitches it. Because I'm not even a big fan personally of overly cinematic games like The Last of Us, which is very much a narrative driven game. I like narrative driven games, but to me this it isn't exactly my genre. But this kind of skips over the entire emotional impact that video games can have as a medium. And I will defend, because what are video games but stories being told in the same way that movies are being portrayed, in the same way that books are being written. There are plots, there's dialogue, there's visual elements. And as graphics have improved, I think you even get closer. But I think that this completely negates. And now, again, with the very literal thing he says, which is, you know, you should be more emotionally impacted, or when watching a person die should be different than watching pixels die. I agree with that on a technical level, and I think the more in person and the more human something is, the more you can. But I also think that completely neglects the fact that there are very real stories and emotional responses you can get from other mediums. It's like this guy's never read a book and been affected by a character dying in a book.
Yeah,
so,
that's a great.
For those reasons, I think it's a bad take.
I think I agree with you on that. I like how you delineate, because I think technically, like, all things being equal, how about you could say, like, the story writing, the character development, the perception of the characters, regardless of book, video game, or movie. Like, if those are all equal, those like things that actually matter, like, I think they should be weighted heaviest in terms of whether you care about a person dying or not. Then I think actually seeing them on the screen does like take the cake, right? Like that pushes it over the edge in terms of mattering. But like, it's not the ultimate way that it's not the heaviest weight in determining whether or not it matters or not. Like you're saying with the books, like I just think about I think about like the section in the Lord of the Rings, right? Like when Gandalf, you think he dies. Like it's really emotional, both in the movie version and in the book. I think about like I was I'm not sure if you like Halo or not, but like I was playing through those games again. Did you ever watch the show?
No, I didn't.
Terrible.
I heard terrible things about it.
Terrible. Absolutely terrible. I watched the show and I thought, this is so bad. I'm going to go back and play the original Xbox game, because like I remember like personally being affected by the stakes that occurred in the game. And, you know, when like there's certain characters that die in that, and like at the end of Halo 3, like some of them sacrifice, or then like you're not even a human, like the AI character sacrifices themselves. And it's really kind of emotional because all of the development has been put into it. And that's what's weighted most, right? Regardless of whether I played it in a video game, watched it on screen, or I read it in a book, like as long as the development of the character is done well and they're like realistic and all those things, will be good. I don't really know much about Craig Mazin, but this seems almost like maybe they're not going to do such a good job, on this show. And they're positioning it to be like, well, it's more impactful because you actually saw them. Because The Last of Us is a pretty impactful, like, father-daughter. I mean, it's kind of the trope these days, the lone wanderer picks up the orphan kid deal. But I mean, the video game was pretty emotional and how it all played out. So
right.
Hopefully they can deliver on it. This almost seems like he's trying to give himself like, oh, well, I'm seeing it live, so like it should be more emotional. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say, if nothing else, this from a strategic standpoint, as a creator of a show that's based on a video game franchise, you're doing yourselves no favors when you tell the core demographic of people who should be watching your show, hey, the thing that you love that we're basing this off, I don't care about. That's what this comes across as.
Yeah, yes, you're totally right.
And again, as you pointed out with the Halo show, the track record for this kind of,
they literally said that in Halo
is terrible. And so, if you're trying to convince, no, guys, this time it will be different, it's not really a good start for you to do that, I don't think.
Yeah, the Halo folks literally said we didn't play any of the games, like the writers, like we just want to make our own story. It's like, dude, like it's like, don't reinvent the wheel here, man. Like you got something that like literally millions, tens of millions of people love, have been emotionally affected by, and was successful and sold millions upon millions of copies of this game. And you're just gonna be like, I think I can do it better. Right. It's like, no, you can't. And I just realized, dude, like the Lone Wanderer thing, like the Mandalorian and Grogu, like it's Pedro Pascal is the main character in this. I didn't realize that. Like,
oh, yeah. I
guess he's the guy now for that.
Yeah,
like,
that's right.
It's kind of funny.
Well, so the other thing I want to, there's a couple other things I want to highlight, because again, the more I think about it, the more I think this is a terrible take, but the more I also strongly agree with him in the sense that different mediums convey different things, have different strengths in conveying emotions and imagery and things like that. So oftentimes you might think, well, The Last of Us is a very cinematic video game. Why would I want to watch a TV show or a movie when playing the game, you just have a more interactive experience and you kind of get the same cinematic. And I think, on the one hand, I actually kind of agree with that point. That's why I don't like The Last of Us that much as a game. But second, I do think that there is something that a movie can capture that a game can't. And that is that human element, that very realistic, absolute gripping, connection, because you're seeing actual humans, that kind of thing, which I think, cinematic experiences can do very well. And that's what you should be harping on, not the other stuff is crap and boring and lame. Here, this is going to be so much better, because his argument is really stupid. If you're saying when you're playing a section, you're killing people, you die and get sent back to the checkpoint, all those are back moving around in the same way. One, that's not true for so many different games these days. That hasn't been true in years. I mean, go back to like the year 2000, Majora's Mask came out, and that one operated on a 3-day cycle where people, over the course of 3 days, your choices mattered and people were gone or missing if you did something. And it's like, okay, if you're talking about being able to go back to a checkpoint, if you're watching a movie, you can just hit rewind and they're back.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a stupid argument to make what is, I think, again, a legitimate point. What he should be saying is something like, we're excited to take The Last of Us to a new level. The gameplay or the games were a marvelous storytelling experience, and we think we can leverage, this TV show in a cinematic interface to be even more emotionally impacting than it was the first time. Something like that I would have no problem with, and I think would be the right take. But this one, he's making a bad argument, which is, the lack of permanence or whatever, which again, not been a thing in video games for a really long time. And two, he's arguing it in such a dismissive way that it's just not a good point for the very audience he's trying to attract.
Yeah. Oh man, will you watch it? I don't even know what it's coming out on.
I don't think so. It's probably on a subscription service I don't have, to be perfectly frank. But I was going to say the other thing I think about too is there's such a high number of just terrible garbage TV shows, and I would say, and I mean, there's a lot of garbage video games too, but I would say that if you put the average high production video game, even from indie studios that are trying to do something with a story, versus the average TV show, I think video games probably come on top when it comes to gripping actual, I don't know, like the average quality of the storytelling. I mean, speaking of Halo, I even think about Reach. I thought one of the most impacting moments in Reach is when one of the main characters, one of your main squads, you're literally in a cutscene just walking from point A to point B, nothing's going on, and they just get shot in the head, dead. Like nothing, it wasn't this overly dramatic like TV moment of where they were running across a cliff and threw the golden egg across and fell in the cliff and they saved the. It was like, no, it was just dead, just because that's the reality of war or whatever. And there are shows and movies that do that in amazing ways too. But I just think about, I feel like on average, gameplay or video games have had a little bit more to prove in recent years, and I think they've done a really good job about that.
Kind of thing. Yeah, that's interesting. I'll have to think more on that, because I think if you compare, like I'm thinking about even Cyberpunk, right? like a lot of issues with the game. Technically, story-wise, they're pretty dope. Like it was pretty cool. And so even games that falter on the technical side or get hate, like I would still prefer their story over most of the like cinema that's come out as of late. And I wonder why. It must be something about that like hands-on nature of developing a game. Not to say that you're not hands-on when you're developing a movie, but like maybe, I don't know, maybe the people that are closest to the story and closer to the technical implementation, maybe there's something to do with that.
I think so. I think there's something to that.
All right, moving on to our next one. We've never had this guy, which is really funny to me, but Paul Ehrlich, ancient wrong economist and predictor, which kind of gives away, I guess, my disposition towards this take. But he tweets out, and I should give some backstory on this. So Paul Ehrlich, in the 1970s and 80s, famously came out with a book called The Population Bomb, which basically predicted that hundreds of millions of people would die because of overpopulation, that we needed to limit how many people were going to be born, that all the resources were going to be taken up, and basically this doom and gloom thing. He said basically, I think it was by the 90s, that the United States would dwindle to like 23 million people in population because of just lack of resources and stuff. To his credit, right, like unlike a lot of these other climate change folks, he put hard dates to it, which just served to prove him very much wrong. And there's a famous bet between him and a guy named Julian Simon, where basically Julian Simon said, "Okay, Paul Ehrlich, you pick out any of the top resources and tell me which ones, and I bet you $1,000 that they'll be cheaper by the year 2000 than they are today." And Julian Simon famously won that bet. Anyways, Paul Ehrlich went on 60 Minutes, I think it was this past week, to basically rehash all of his age-old predictions that were, that doom and gloom, and we're going to, because of the overpopulation, we're going to be having issues. Conservatives and freedom and pro-human people came out and criticized him, and he tweeted this out. 60 Minutes extinction story has brought the usual right wing out in force. If I'm always wrong, so is the science. Since my work is always peer-reviewed, including the population bomb, and I've gotten virtually every scientific honor. Sure, I've made some mistakes, but no basic ones. What do you think, Donnie?
I think this is a terrible take. I love his like, sure, I've made some mistakes, but no basic ones, which is funny because
no spelling issues.
Yeah, exactly. I think if I'm gonna steel man, what I would assume he means by this is the idea that he has not made basic errors, so the fundamental building blocks of his argument would still hold. So maybe the dates were a mistake or something along those lines, but the pieces he's putting in there add up. And to that, I would say you actually probably need to do a little bit more, like you need to have a little bit more substance there than to just sort of claim this, like just to say, yeah, I've made mistakes, but no basic ones. Well, why? Like you can't just make that claim. You need to give a backup. Like I think a great example would be, for instance, if an Austrian is saying, well, there's a big crash coming, and they predicted it in like 2019, and then that didn't happen in 2019, they might be able to go back and say, okay, well, I said 2019. Here's the reason why I put those things together, but basically speaking, there will be a crash. It's still coming, and you can see it based on XYZ evidence. Obviously, Twitter's not the best medium for that, but I do think that this is funny because he's getting very defensive. He's getting very he's retreating into the hedges of saying like, oh, my work's always peer reviewed, and so even the mistakes that I put out there are verified, so it's okay. I don't know. That seems like a little bit of a weak defense, but then again, I think credentials matter a lot more to people than actual outcomes in many cases, right?
It blew me away when I read this, when he said, if I'm always wrong, so is science. Like,
yes,
it was just, I was like, oh wow, like this guy and Dr. Fauci must be brothers. Dr. Fauci is the truth, and Paul Ehrlich is the science. And I mean, Dr. Fauci also claimed to be the science too. So it's just, it's always noteworthy to me that these perceived experts, when they are proven wrong, called to be wrong, called out, or challenged, instead of rising to the occasion and destroying people with their vaunted arguments, they retreat to, well, my appeals of authority and my work is peer reviewed and all these things. It's like, dude, like, do you know how many things that were scientifically proven wrong later were peer reviewed and like basically was the consensus at one point? Like the fact that like everything revolved around the Earth, right? Like that used to be the consensus view, and there were papers and books and literature. And people spoke about it and people vouched for one another. And it was basically the consensus view that we didn't orbit the sun, but the sun orbited us. And that was proven to be wrong. So that means nothing if you can't support it with actual arguments. If anything, him saying like, "Oh, my stuff was peer reviewed," it's like, well, I question who's peer reviewing your stuff because you've been wrong. And I get what you're saying. I like that you steelmanned it and that he was saying like you're saying, like an Austrian economist would say, I think Bob Murphy had the prediction that we'd have some sort of really huge crash, and he was wrong. But what he did a good job of doing was like saying like, no, like even though we haven't had the crash, that doesn't disprove the fact that like the Federal Reserve's been printing money. We have quantitative easing, and these things are still describing. We're still heading towards that direction, and you can see that with the way that the inflation rate is headed, with the way housing prices and different types of prices of goods are headed, and the different types of actions. And sure, it may be delayed, but that doesn't mean it's not still coming. I haven't seen Paul Ehrlich give a really solid argument for that, right? And like he hasn't even really addressed why his predictions in 1980 were wrong, and that's a really big issue. But the anti-human side of the government and the elites really like this guy, so he'll continue to have a platform regardless of being wrong.
Yeah, well, I particularly like and I've gotten virtually every scientific honor. It's like, okay, then cool. But again, if you're wrong, you're wrong. That's like, that's like people claiming Barack Obama was anti-war because he got the Nobel Peace Prize.
Exactly.
It's, these accolades don't mean much if your actions are different than the outcomes, and different than what you're being lauded for and awarded. That's just silly. So I think this to me very much reeks of I'm in academia, and my ideas, what I'm putting forward, is all very speculative. It's all very detached from the real world. And so it doesn't really matter if I was correct. It doesn't really matter if anything I've said comes to fruition, because I put in a lot of hard thinking and work, and I was rewarded for that. And the right people thought that what I said was smart, and so I got this medal for it. Therefore, it doesn't matter if it if it came true, you still have to respect me. And I mean, to bring him back to Fauci, it makes me think of every time Fauci was questioned about the consequences of his policies, and have you considered how these kinds of lockdown measures, even apart from the medical truths of them spreading, how they might impact society and whether that's healthy or not. And he said, that's not my job. I'm not supposed to think about the policy impacts on people. I'm just trying to recommend what the healthiest option is, which of course is absurd because social policy has to do with health. But it's that same, it doesn't really matter. I'm just living in a vacuum, and as long as I come up with the right theories and ideas and push them forward, doesn't matter if they connect with reality at all. And that's, I mean, I know I've said this before, but I like what Dave Smith says about libertarianism, which is, this is a great philosophy, but a philosophy is totally meaningless if it doesn't actually work. And that's what makes libertarianism great, is that it works in the real world. You apply the libertarian theory to real world situations, and that is the solution. It's useless if it's just a cool theory. And so I think that this kind of thinking is very much in the, I have a very cool theory, but it doesn't really work with reality.
Absolutely. All right, moving on to our next one. We've got a quote retweet, and then we're critiquing the response to the quote retweet. So Phil Labonte, lead singer of All That Remains, tweeted out, if someone created a browser extension that changed the word, quote, racism to the word, quote, sin, it would likely be clear how religious the left is. Someone quote retweeted this, and they said, religion is literally basing your morals on a faith-based, all-knowing God. Leftists base our morals on seeing people as equal, regardless of factors used to discriminate. Can right-wingers even think of owns anymore? Like, your insults are like third-grade insults. And then Phil Labonte replied, and this is the take we are critiquing. If you don't like religion, if you don't have religion, where does your morality come from? You create it. And what makes it more valid than a morality someone else creates? Nothing. What do you think?
I think it's a good take. I think he's accurate, and I think the tweet before it is really funny because it gets very defensive, almost like an insult. And I didn't even read the first tweet as as like a I don't know. You guys are religious, more as like a critique, not an insult. It's more like a listen. You need to recognize that your quote unquote free thinking or following the science really is dogmatic in principle. Religion is an interesting word because I feel like so many people use it in different ways and it gets connotations that it should or should not have. I think it's often used as, sort of religion means that you follow the dogmatic writings here and there, and you have to believe in this and that for morality's sake. And then some people are saying, no, religion is all this free. Religion can be anything you want it to be. It's just a general, vague belief system, and it just means that you believe in something. And so religion as a word, I feel like whether or not you adhere to the strict definition or not, just gets misapplied. And I think that leads to people reading into the use of the word religion in different contexts. So I think this person who replied to Phil's original tweet took it as a very dismissive, demeaning thing for it to be called a religion.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah.
And to me, it's, I think it's a critique, not because all religions are wrong or bad, but I think it's a critique of, the position that they generally hold themselves or the standard they hold themselves to. But then I think it's funny because I think his tweet after that, I feel like he's harping more on the how, if you don't have a religion, then how do you get your morals? I think, almost like Phil's not taking the bait that the guy sets up there.
Yeah.
And he's saying, no, let's get to the truth of what you think religion is, because this guy seems to define it in a way that's religion is literally basing your morals on faith-based all-knowing God. And then he goes and defines how he bases his morals. And so Phil's like, okay, well, let's explore how you did that. Is that not the exact same process as what a religion does? And I think that's a pretty good, a good way to round people back to, a religion is actually both more broad than you mean it and more specific than you mean it. And you fall into that camp.
Yeah, I think Phil Levante is even like agnostic or atheist. I might be wrong on that. But yeah, I mean, like you were saying, I think his original tweet is just a critique, and it's because like a lot of the leftists are like, oh, like religious people like want to be moral, but they're only moral because their God says so, and or they're just crazy religious. And I think it's really funny how like this person took it as like offensive that he would say this, like not as an insult, right? Like you were saying. And the first thing that came to my mind, when I saw this, because I didn't see his original reply. I only saw the retweet and then it said show more. And my original thought was like, well, how does this person like they say leftists base our morals on seeing people as equal. It's like, well, how do you know that seeing people as equal is the right thing, right? Like you have to be able to define that. And then I went down and Phil Labonte did a great job debunking it, because that is really the crux of it. Like you eventually have to ask yourself, like, why do I have the morals that I have? And how do I even define that right is what we should do or what people ought to do or what other people ought to do? I think it was Nietzsche, kind of has this whole thing in his book. It was either him or Carl Jung, but basically said that like folks were going to become way more irrational the less religious they became and the more they moved towards what they perceived as rationalism, because religion, morals, like the thing that undergirds that, the supreme sovereign anchors you. You can't necessarily explain why being equal or viewing other people as equal to you in terms of rights and respect and all that stuff is good unless you have something that is the ultimate moral lawgiver above you. You can have, I'm not necessarily saying that has to be, although I believe it has to be Jesus or whoever, but that's like a structural function and necessity for you to have any morals whatsoever. And once we get rid of that foundation, we get rid of that, the structural beams that hold the moral house together, nothing holds it together, and it automatically collapses because there is no reason to believe anything. Nihilism ensues. And so I think he did a fantastic job in such a succinct way too, right? Like you and I have now just dedicated whatever is 10 minutes to talking about it. And he just did it in a couple sentences. And I think he's a great debater, and he definitely wins at Twitter.
Yes. Yeah. And I think it's funny because people will make the vague argument about senses or common sense notions or things that are just intrinsic. Like, you just know you shouldn't, you feel a stomach revulsion or something if you do something like kick a puppy, or there's and one, that's not true. There are lots of people who get joy out of suffering and out of cruelty, and that's why you have things like children bullies or children who want to torture animals. Like, there is a sick pleasure out of doing bad things in many cases. So there's not a good argument for that being kind of your moral compass. And then a lot of what people will learn is from other people. And so whether or not they admit it, your morals are either on the basis of social mores, which are vastly produced from Judeo-Christian values, or other cultural values that are based in some theistic or religious grounding, or they're based on another person and their writings, at which point you've just elevated that other individual to your prophet, to your God, to whatever it is. If it's the 1619 Project, whatever, that's your sacred text. However you want to view it, wherever you are divining, there are very few people in this world who are free thinkers and who come up with original thoughts, let alone original morals and a way to articulate them. And so I think there are a few people who try to do the best they can. Ultimately, I think it's all based on some form of natural law or a misapplication of the natural law that we have in this world. But there are a few people who come up with truly profound ways to think about things and are not based on necessarily the exact culture around them. And those people are exceedingly rare. And most people are going to fall into a religious belief of something one way or the other.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Moving on to our last one. We've got Ryan Saavedra, Blue Check Verified. Do you know who he is or what he does?
I'm not sure. I imagine he might be like just reporting on this is just a quote from Representative Green. Cool. So I just took it that way.
Okay. So Marjorie Taylor Greene, he's taking a quote from her. And she writes or says, quote, "I'm not sure how Lauren Boebert on one hand can demand so much out of Kevin McCarthy, but then demand nothing out of someone else and be willing to vote for them to be speaker. That's not serious. I don't think that's leadership, and I really see it as more obstruction." What do you think?
Well, first, just to clarify, he's a senior writer at Daily Wire. Okay, so he is a journalist there. I think this is a terrible take from her. I think this is absolutely bad.
Surprising. This is not in line with how she normally is, which is kind of interesting.
I'm very, very surprised at I think many people were. And maybe I don't know. I don't take her to be too much of a showman in this kind of way where you want to like split to show your differences. Sometimes, Republicans will vote contrary on bills they know will pass, and Democrats do it too to show their independence.
The whole game. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't take this from Marjorie Taylor Greene here. I don't think that's what she's doing. On the one hand, I sympathize in the sense that if you make a bunch of demands, right, and you say, we want you to do X, Y, and Z, otherwise we won't vote for you. If you're going to make that, and then that person makes those concessions, it does seem a little silly to not then vote for that person once they make the concessions. And for all intents and purposes, that kind of seems like what's happened to McCarthy. He's kind of hated by everyone because he seems to be capitulating to the Freedom Caucus, and yet they still won't support him. But on the second hand, everyone there hates McCarthy because he's not trustworthy. He's a slimy, ridiculous shell of a man. In fact, fun story, someone you probably at least knew of him if you didn't know him at school. He came from Bakersfield, California, and I was talking with him back in 2014 or 2013, sometime back then. He was on my floor, and he'd met McCarthy because McCarthy represents Bakersfield. And he was like, yeah, I only talked with him briefly, but he was slimy and was not real. You could tell he was a total politician, just a total creep. And it was very funny to hear that because at the time he was gaining power bit by bit. I think he'd just been announced as, I don't think it was majority leader. He'd gained some position.
He was the whip, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, back in 2014. Yeah, something like that. Yeah. So anyway, so it was just very funny to hear that early on. And so it's interesting that Marjorie Taylor Greene is criticizing Boebert for holding out. To me, I think the more accurate critique, if you're going to make that critique, is don't make demands if you're not going to trust the person you're making the demands of to meet them. at that point you're just lying. Say you're never going to vote for the person, but that's not the claim she's making. She's just saying it's not leadership, it's just obstruction. Well, you should be praising obstruction for one thing, but even still, I don't know. It just seems like not like her.
It's really interesting because her and Thomas Massey, I remember the one on Timcast, and we're talking about how like just fed up they were with all the different procedures and tricks that the House leadership would pull. And that they were actively fighting against that and trying to make everyone vote on bills when people would try to weasel out and not vote so their names were on it and things like that. And so it's really interesting for her to totally switch and like be on the side of like the swampiest of swamp monsters out there. Kind of similar to you. I definitely know who you're talking about on that. We also used to play at a church that Kevin McCarthy calls his church when he's in Bakersfield. I remember talking to one of the folks from there, and this is in probably around the same time, 2014. And I remember that I was talking with this person. They said, "Oh yeah, like Kevin McCarthy, the show House of Cards, like the main character, Frank Underwood, they based it off of Kevin McCarthy. And when Kevin heard that, like he was really pleased." And it's like, man, like you do not, if you have never watched House of Cards, you do not want to be Frank Underwood, who is played by Kevin Spacey, equally as awful of a person. Right. So, I mean, that just kind of shows Kevin McCarthy views his template for being a hero as Frank Underwood, which is not a the fictional character, which is nothing good. So, yeah, I don't know. From what I understand, Lauren Boebert's and Matt Gaetz and all those folks demand is that we'll choose anyone but Kevin McCarthy because he's not trustworthy. So yeah, there is nothing that Kevin McCarthy can do to win their support to become a speaker. It's just not going to happen, right? At the end of the day, I mean, there was plenty of people that were never Trump, and no one was accusing them of obstruction or anything like that. I totally am fine with them having their principled stance, even if it has no valid reason behind it necessarily, or it's out of selfish ambition. But no one said they were obstructing. They had some sort of principle or some sort of goal, and the ultimate goal is Trump is not going to be president or the presidential nominee. So yeah, that's it. And I think Lauren Boebert and Matt Gaetz have made their position pretty clear. It does not matter how many concessions he gives, they're never going to vote for him. I'm going to be really disappointed if they do, to be honest with you. Like that would be, I don't like any of them, but
yeah. I'm frankly really confused and disappointed why there aren't more of them. And in particular, I'm shocked that Massey is not among them. Thomas Massey is not among the 20 who didn't vote for
I know. Yeah.
And I haven't seen anything from him. I see that he's tweeted out some interviews that maybe he's done on the radio or something like that. So I might listen to that after the fact to hear his reasoning. But I was going to say, the Massey is surprising to me. Some other people who are, generally more conservative inclined, I'm not as surprised about, like Jim Jordan. There's a lot of the ones who a lot of them have been voting for has been Jim Jordan. He himself voted for McCarthy.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, all right, man. So I don't know. It's disappointing. It's just very funny that the House and all of the political elections really, I mean, the Republicans got their butt kicked this last November, and they're trying to continue with the status quo. They're trying to continue with the guy who was the next anointed leader. And there aren't more people who are saying, no, stop. We need to change. This obviously didn't work. Let's not repeat the same thing and get the same results over and over again. We actually want to win. Whether or not that's possible in DC, you and I probably don't think that victory there is worth much anyway, but at least there are people trying, and I would much rather there would be people trying in that form than people just kind of giving the rubber stamp to the next anointed officer of the GOP reign.
Yeah, I mean, who I can't remember who this reminds me of, some fictional character, but I guess maybe it's even worse in real life. Kevin McCarthy saying like, "Oh, well, I earned this. This is my position." It's like, well, you didn't earn it, buddy, because you don't got the votes. So sure, you've been there, but that doesn't. I can't. There's some fictional character that I'm thinking of. Like I just picture Joffrey from Game of Thrones or something like that, just throwing a tantrum. So
it's
I'm pretty
exactly
disappointed. Go for it.
It's not exactly 1-to-1, but I just keep thinking of the Rogue One. These are my accomplishments, not yours.
Yes.
Which,
Yes.
Not exactly 1-to-1, but it's just the same kind of temper
Just as awful
tantrum
though.
entitlement. Yeah.
Cool. Any more on this one?
I don't think so.
Cool. Well, folks, thanks for hanging out with us. Please make sure again to like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff, and we will catch you on the next one.